You spend 20 solid minutes writing the perfect prompt for Claude.
Yeah, defining the exact tone and everything.
Right. You set highly specific formatting rules.
Mm-hmm.
You feed it perfectly curated background information to set the stage.
And it works absolutely perfectly at first.
For the first dozen or so exchanges, right?
Exactly. You feel like an absolute productivity genius orchestrating this machine.
The output is crisp, accurate, and completely aligned with your vision.
But then, maybe 15 or 20 messages later, the AI completely forgets everything.
It just starts acting incredibly dumb and entirely confused.
It completely loses the custom voice you spent so long crafting.
Yeah, it completely loses the plot and reverts to a generic robot.
It's a massive problem that silently frustrates so many daily users.
Welcome to this deep dive into the mechanics of artificial memory.
Today, we're exploring a really fascinating and deeply frustrating phenomenon.
We're dissecting a brilliant, comprehensive article from researcher Max Ann.
It was published in March of 2026 to massive acclaim.
The title describes exactly what we just talked about a moment ago.
Why Claude gets dumber the more you talk to it.
Our mission today is to thoroughly unpack this hidden issue.
We're going to explore a pervasive phenomenon called context rot.
We'll dive deeply into the actual science behind the artificial forgetting.
We'll look at why more information actually hurts large language models.
We'll also help you identify the subtle early warning signs.
And finally, we'll reveal several professional fixes to cure the rot.
These workflows will help you easily maintain that perfect day one clarity.
It's going to completely change how you interface with artificial intelligence.
Let's start with what An calls the invisible wall of context.
A lot of users mistakenly think they're doing something inherently wrong.
They think their carefully crafted prompts are just, not good enough.
They assume they need to learn some secret, advanced prompting technique.
But the reality is actually much more complex and systemic.
We need to clearly define what context rot really is.
Yeah, it's not a simple user error at all.
Context rot is a highly measurable, predictable drop in output quality.
It happens entirely naturally as an AI conversation grows longer over time.
The longer you talk, the worse the model inevitably becomes.
There's this incredibly pervasive myth of the limitless context window right now.
Claude advertises a truly massive 200,000 token window for users.
That sounds like a virtually infinite amount of digital space.
You assume it can read and perfectly remember a dozen massive PDFs?
It really does sound completely limitless to most casual users.
But rigorous research shows a very different and incredibly sobering reality.
Meaningful performance drops can consistently appear at just 50,000 tokens.
That's only 25% of the total advertised window capacity.
Think of it like pouring water into a bucket.
Okay, I like that analogy.
It looks like a truly massive industrial-sized metal bucket.
So you think you can pour gallons of water into it safely?
But it actually has a massive hidden leak inside.
Ah.
And that leak is just a quarter of the way up.
No matter how much water you pour in, it eventually escapes.
The water just quietly drains out the side without you noticing.
That's a perfect way to visualize the underlying problem.
The model just leaks out the oldest and most vital instructions.
And this isn't just a temporary software bug they can patch.
It's not something a quick software update will magically fix tomorrow.
It's a fundamental, deeply structural limitation in these complex systems.
Transformer-based models all share this exact same severe architectural flaw.
Claude, GPT, and Gemini all experience this exact same gradual degradation.
So if the window is 200,000 tokens, why even advertise that if it rots at 50,000?
Well, the model can technically hold that massive amount of data, right? It just can't apply full attention to all of it simultaneously.
So it stores everything, but can only focus on a fraction at once.
Right. And that brings us to the actual mechanical details.
We know the massive context window is structurally flawed right now.
But we really need to look under the hood of these models.
We need to understand exactly why the AI inevitably loses its focus.
What is the actual science behind this sudden artificial forgetting?
It all comes down to the underlying architecture of these specific models.
We need to briefly talk about the internal attention mechanism.
A system that decides which words matter most when writing a response.
Every single token gets a highly specific mathematical attention score.
The model decides exactly how much to care about each specific word.
It constantly weighs the importance of every single piece of text.
But internal attention is an inherently limited and finite resource.
As the overall context grows, each token gets less relative focus.
It's a strict, unforgiving zero-sum game inside the model's brain.
Researchers found two distinct patterns for how this memory failure happens.
The first pattern kicks in relatively early on in the chat.
It happens when the window is under 50% full.
They accurately call it the lost in the middle effect.
A massive study in 2023 tested this phenomenon directly.
They gave the model 20 different dense documents to read thoroughly.
It was a huge pile of highly complex legal information.
If the important information was at the very beginning, it worked perfectly.
If the information was at the very end, it also worked.
But what if the core instructions were stuck right in the middle?
Say, buried deeply in page 10 of a 50-page document.
The model's accuracy dropped by more than 30% immediately.
The AI just quietly lost track of the core instructions entirely.
Ooh!
Whoa, imagine 50,000 tokens of context just dissolving.
2-sec silence.
Yeah.
It's genuinely staggering to think about the scale.
Your most important, meticulously crafted rules are just completely ignored.
Then the behavioral pattern shifts again as the window fills up.
When it gets over 50% full, things change radically.
A much simpler and far more brutal pattern takes over entirely.
The model develops a severe, crippling case of recency bias.
It starts heavily favoring the absolute most recent tokens it sees.
It's like a stressed coworker reading a massive, chaotic email chain.
They only bother to reply to the very last message sent.
They completely ignore the initial project brief from 3 days ago.
It effectively resets its own short-term memory completely to survive.
It completely ignores your initial tone and your strict formatting rules.
For a really long time, researchers thought this was a search problem.
They thought the AI just couldn't find the right needle.
They assumed the specific information was just hidden too well.
But a major 2025 study revealed something much more uncomfortable.
It's actually a fundamental volume problem, not a simple search problem.
The sheer length of the input mathematically destroys the system's clarity.
It's not about finding the shiny needle in the giant haystack.
The massive size of the haystack itself breaks the system's focus.
The model just gets utterly overwhelmed by the sheer token volume.
Exactly. It drowns in all the conversational noise you provided.
Is there any way to bold or highlight instructions so they survive the middle? I still wrestle with prompt drift myself.
Sadly, no, primarily because of that zero-sum game we mentioned earlier. Every single token competes fiercely for the model's very limited attention. So highlighting doesn't solve the core volume issue.
Every single comma steals focus from your main instructions.
Yeah, that's exactly what happens under the hood.
2-sec silence. We can't fundamentally rewire the model's attention mechanism ourselves.
We have to learn how to actively diagnose the drift instead.
How do you actually spot this rot before your output is completely ruined?
Outlines several extremely clear warning signs to rigorously watch for.
But they rarely show up all at once, which is incredibly tricky.
The conversation usually still looks completely normal on the immediate surface.
But something just feels slightly, almost imperceptibly off in the responses.
Let's walk through a highly relatable, everyday example of this decay.
You're using Claude to write a complex marketing plan for a startup.
You explicitly tell it to target Gen Z audiences exclusively.
You also tell it to strictly avoid any formal corporate jargon.
That's a great setup with very clear, specific operational constraints.
The first few marketing emails it generates are absolutely perfect.
They're punchy, they use the right slang, and they hit the target.
But then you ask it to generate 10 more email variations.
You keep iterating and discussing the broader strategy for another 20 minutes.
The context window is rapidly filling up with all that back and forth chatter.
Exactly. And suddenly, the AI suggests a highly formal LinkedIn campaign.
It completely forgot you were targeting Gen Z audiences on TikTok.
It starts using words like synergy and paradigm shift aggressively.
That's constraint drift in its purest, most profoundly frustrating form.
The AI just quietly dropped your foundational rules to save cognitive energy.
That constraint drift is usually the most obvious early symptom for me.
But then the rot quickly starts to infect the actual content.
The unique custom voice you establish just fades away completely.
Yeah, the answers rapidly become incredibly generic and utterly bland.
It reverts back to that default, perfectly safe AI tone.
It sounds like a corporate press release instead of your specific voice.
Then obvious logical contradictions begin to reliably appear in the text.
The AI happily suggests a strategy you already rejected 10 messages ago.
It completely forgets the specific operational boundaries you established earlier.
Its memory is failing, which leads directly to the next terrifying symptom.
Outright hallucinations start to increase significantly as the chat continues.
Because the AI actively forgot the actual facts you fed it, right?
It can't clearly see those earlier grounding facts in its memory anymore.
So instead of openly admitting it doesn't know the answer,
It just starts aggressively making things up.
it improvises entirely to fill the rapidly expanding gaps in its memory.
It hallucinated a whole new reality with absolute, unwavering robot confidence.
The final warning sign is the entirely missed red flag for most people.
It's the exact moment you start repeatedly re-explaining yourself to the machine.
You find yourself typing frustrated phrases like, as I mentioned earlier,
If you're doing that, the context is already rotting away completely.
we instinctively want to just add more text to fix the problem.
We think repasting the original rules will definitely help the AI understand.
We want to firmly remind it of the original brilliant prompt.
But adding more text actually makes the underlying problem much worse.
It completely destroys the crucial signal-to-noise ratio in the active conversation.
Signal being your core rules and noise being everything else. Why does adding more text make hallucinations worse instead of better?
Because piling on text dilutes the essential facts even further. You're just making the chaotic haystack bigger and much harder to search. It forces the AI to improvise to fill the gaps.
More text dilutes the truth, forcing the AI to just guess.
Exactly right. Sponsor.
We're back. We know how to actively diagnose the rot as it happens now.
But we need actionable, highly professional workflows to actually cure it.
We can't just randomly end in every single long conversation we start.
Max On introduces a really brilliant conceptual framework called context compacting.
Since we can't magically upgrade the attention mechanism, we shrink the haystack.
We have to actively manage the model's extremely fragile working memory.
There are several professional fixes to reliably maintain that high-level performance.
The most practical daily baseline is what On calls the 60% rule.
You should never let a chat exceed 60% of its capacity.
In practical, everyday terms, that's roughly about 15 to 20 exchanges.
Once you hit that invisible threshold, you need to firmly hit reset.
Don't blindly push it until it breaks completely and hallucinates.
The second fix is actively summarizing and starting fresh.
It's a brilliant manual reset for the model's exhausted attention mechanism.
You literally ask the AI to summarize all the key decisions made.
You ask it to carefully condense your style constraints into one dense paragraph.
You tell it to perfectly capture the entire essence of the chat.
Then you open a brand new, completely empty chat window immediately.
You paste that single dense paragraph as your very first message.
It resets the model's attention mechanism completely from scratch.
You get that pristine, highly accurate day one clarity right back immediately.
For developers and terminal users, there are amazing native tools for this.
You can use native/commands to elegantly manage the history effortlessly.
You can type /compact to instantly compress the conversation history.
The system secretly summarizes the previous chat into a deeply hidden paragraph.
It clears the board and uses that summary as the new baseline.
You essentially keep the knowledge, but dump the massive token weight.
Do this before the performance actually starts to drop noticeably.
We also deeply need to rethink our initial massive system prompts.
You must keep your system prompt incredibly short and razor sharp.
We all have the natural instinct to include every single edge case.
We fashionably want to put every conceivable rule into the initial setup.
We falsely think more context up front is always fundamentally better.
But long system prompts just eat up valuable context space early on.
They completely hide the most critical instructions among entirely less relevant details.
You should always put the most critical instructions at the very end.
This smartly leverages the model's natural recency bias to your absolute advantage.
It clearly sees the most important rule right before it starts typing.
Finally, for complex multi-step workflows, completely stop using one massive chat.
You absolutely need to use specialized sub-agents to handle the heavy load.
This is basically a brilliant hub-and-spoke design philosophy for AI.
You break incredibly complex workflows into completely separate, highly focused task sessions.
You have one primary manager agent and several isolated specialized worker agents.
No single agent ever gets overloaded with far too much context.
They only ever see the exact information they need for their specific task.
Does summarizing actually capture the subtle tone rules we established?
Wait, I should be asking that. Does summarizing actually capture the sort of tone rules we established?
Yes. It works beautifully if you are extremely explicit about it. But you must explicitly command it to include those specific style constraints. If you don't ask, it might only summarize the dry, factual decisions.
Yes, as long as you specifically command it to save the style rules.
Beat. That brings us to the overarching philosophical framework of all of this.
We need to tie these mechanical fixes into a single cohesive idea.
We need a highly durable mental framework you can easily carry with you.
The defining paradigm shift for AI users right now is truly profound.
You have to completely stop treating AI like a dumb storage cabinet.
You can't just shove endless files and dense documents into the drawer.
You can't treat it like an infinite external hard drive for your thoughts.
You desperately need to start treating AI like human working memory.
A normal human can only hold about 7 distinct things in their head.
If you overwhelm them with 50 complex instructions, they start to drop things.
They panic and completely lose track of the core, fundamental mission.
They substitute lazy assumptions for actual concrete facts just to survive.
Advanced AI models behave in the exact same deeply flawed, entirely human way.
They get completely overwhelmed by the sheer massive volume of conflicting instructions.
Short, incredibly sharp context windows will always thoroughly outperform long, exhaustive threads.
The overall signal-to-noise ratio is the single most important metric to track.
Every single token is constantly fighting for a highly limited pool of attention.
Every polite pleasantry, every repeated instruction actively degrades the final creative output.
Keep the history ruthlessly short and keep the constraints absolutely crystal clear.
It's the only real way to reliably maintain peak performance over time.
2-sec silence. Let's quickly recap the entire fascinating journey we just took.
We learned that context rot is a harsh, undeniable structural reality.
It happens primarily because attention is a zero-sum game inside transformer models.
We saw exactly how complex instructions easily get lost in the middle.
We saw how severe recency bias completely hijacks the model's focus later on.
We learned to actively watch for subtle constraint drift and highly generic answers.
We know never to just lazily re-explain ourselves to a deeply confused AI.
And we learned the incredible restorative power of the summarize and reset technique.
Yeah.
I want to genuinely leave you with a final thought today.
Something to really mull over.
It builds directly on this human working memory analogy we discussed earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Think about a highly stressed out human coworker on a very busy Friday afternoon.
Yeah, we've all been there.
If you hand them 50 pages of dense instructions, they absolutely fail.
They experience intense attention fatigue.
And they automatically default to severe recency bias.
They basically only remember the very last thing you said to them.
Advanced AI models ultimately suffer from the exact same crippling cognitive overload.
It's wild. It's a purely mathematical simulation of human stress.
Maybe the real secret to mastering artificial intelligence isn't writing perfectly optimized code.
No, not at all.
Maybe it's actively learning how to communicate with profound, incredibly empathetic clarity.
That is a really beautiful and totally fascinating way to look at it.
It completely changes how you approach the interface entirely.
Try the summarize and reset technique on your next insanely long thread.
See that brilliant day one clarity magically return for yourself immediately.
It really does work.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Otiro Music.